What's a ham radio?
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today as usual, but first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrow, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle HamRadio1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content.
Hello everyone, Ashley here, and I want to welcome you all back to another episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. I have an awesome episode in store for you today, if I do say so myself, because I will be diving into the Chernobyl disaster of April 1986, and I will be discussing sharing some popular theories that were going on around online after following season 3 and predicting season 4 that relates to the Chernobyl disaster, and if that could be featured in season 4 of the show. And I will also be talking a little bit about the Chernobyl miniseries as well. Before I get into that, I just wanted to let you all know that you will not be hearing Jasmine's voice on the show for a little while. She's got some work commitments, so she'll be unable to record for the next few weeks. So I just wanted to make that announcement and let you know that no, she hasn't left the show or anything like that. She's just on a temporary leave, if you will, due to work. However, I still have some totally tubular episodes in store for you guys, including some upcoming episodes featuring some very special guests. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Now on to today's episode. So to give you a little background into the Chernobyl disaster itself, and what happened and how it occurred and some of the impacts that came because of the disaster from the Chernobyl Wiki. On April 1986, the number 4 reactor of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant located near Pripyat, Ukrainian SSR, Soviet Union, present-day Ukraine, exploded. With dozens of direct casualties, it is one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents rated at the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale, the other being the 2011 Fukushima nuclear accident that occurred in Japan. The response involved more than 500,000 personnel and cost an estimated 18 billion rubles, which is about $84.5 billion US dollars in 2025. It remains the worst nuclear disaster in history and is the costliest disaster in human history, with an estimated cost of 700 billion US dollars. The disaster occurred while running a test to simulate cooling the reactor during an accident in blackout conditions. The operators carried out the test despite an accidental drop in reactor power, and due to a design issue, attempting to shut down the reactor in those conditions resulted in a dramatic power surge. The reactor components ruptured and lost coolants, and the resulting steam explosions and meltdown destroyed the reactor building number 4, followed by a reactor core fire that spread radioactive contaminants across the Soviet Union and Europe. A 10-kilometer or 6.2-mile exclusion zone was established 36 hours after the accident, initially evacuating around 49,000 people. The exclusion zone was later expanded to 30 kilometers, 19 miles, resulting in the evacuation of approximately 68,000 more people. Following the explosion, which killed 2 engineers and severely burned 2 others, an emergency operation began to put out the fires and stabilize the reactor. Of the 237 workers hospitalized, 134 showed symptoms of acute radiation syndrome, also known as ARS. 28 of them died within 3 months. Over the next decade, 14 more workers, 9 of whom had ARS, died of various causes, mostly unrelated to radiation exposure. It is the only instance in commercial nuclear power history where radiation-related fatalities occurred. As of 2005, 6,000 cases of childhood thyroid cancer occurred within the affected populations, a large fraction being attributed to the disaster. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation estimates fewer than 100 deaths have resulted from the fallout. Predictions of the eventual total death toll vary. A 2006 World Health Organization study projected 9,000 cancer-related fatalities in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Pripyat was abandoned and replaced by the purpose-built city of Slavutik. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant sarcophagus, which is, I consider it looks like something you would see at an airport where all the planes go into. So it's like this big covering that covers the site where, like right over the destroyed nuclear reactor 4 and just basically the whole complex. Anyway, the sarcophagus, which was completed in December of 1986, reduced the spread of radioactive contamination and provided radiological protection for the crews of the undamaged reactors. Between 2016 and 2018, the Chernobyl new safe confinement was constructed around the old sarcophagus to enable the removal of the reactor debris, with cleanup scheduled for completion by 2065. So how did it happen? How did the Chernobyl disaster happen? What just made it so bad? According to the World Nuclear Association, the RBMK-1000 reactor is a Soviet-designed and built graphite moderated pressure tube type reactor using slightly enriched or 2% uranium-235 uranium dioxide fuel. It is a boiling light water reactor with 2 loops feeding steam directly to the turbines without an intervening heat exchanger. Water pumped to the bottom of the fuel channels boils as it progresses up the pressure tubes, producing steam which feeds 2 500 MWE turbines. The water acts as a coolant and also provides the steam used to drive the turbines. The vertical pressure tubes contain the zirconium alloy clad uranium dioxide fuel around which the cooling water flows. The extension of the fuel channels penetrate the lower plate and the cover plate of the core and are welded to each other. A specially designed refueling machine allows fuel bundles to be changed without shutting down the reactor. The moderator, the function of which is to slow down neutrons to make them more efficient in producing fission in the fuel, is graphite, surrounding the pressure tubes. A mixture of nitrogen and helium is circulated between the graphite blocks to prevent oxidation of the graphite and to improve the transmission of the heat produced by neutron interactions in the graphite to the fuel channel. The core itself is about 7 meters high and about 12 meters in diameter. In each of the 2 loops, there are 4 main coolant circulating pumps, one of which is always on standby. The reactivity or power of the reactor is controlled by raising or lowering 211 control rods, which, when lowered into the moderator, absorb neutrons and reduce the fission rate. The power output of this reactor is 3,200 MW thermal or 1,000 MWE. Various safety systems, such as an emergency core cooling system, were incorporated into the reactor design. One of the most important characteristics of the RBMK reactor is that it can possess a positive void coefficient, where an increase in steam bubbles, also known as voids, is accompanied by an increase in core reactivity. As steam production in the fuel channels increases, the neutrons that would have been absorbed by the denser water now produce increased fission in the fuel. There are other components that contribute to the overall power coefficient of reactivity, But the void coefficient is the dominant one in RBMK reactors. The void coefficient depends on the composition of the core. A new RBMK core will have a negative void coefficient. However, at the time of the accident at Chernobyl 4, the reactor's fuel burnup, control rod configuration, and power level led to a positive void coefficient large enough to overwhelm all other influences on the power coefficient. On April 25th, the day before the nuclear disaster occurred at Chernobyl, prior to a routine shutdown, the reactor crew at Chernobyl 4 began preparing for a test to determine how long turbines would spin and supply power to the main circulating pumps following a loss of main electrical power supply. This test had been carried out at Chernobyl the previous year, but the power from the turbine ran down too rapidly, so new voltage regulator designs were to be tested. A series of operator actions, including the disabling of automatic shutdown mechanisms, preceded the attempted test early on April 26th. By the time that the operator moved to shut down the reactor was in an extremely unstable condition. A peculiarity of the design of the control rods caused a dramatic power surge as they were inserted into the reactor. So, basically, it was already over before it ever began. These poor people that were in this testing room and on site, testing everything, they were already doomed before they even realized it, before the alarms went off, because that's how quickly this power surge was. The interaction of very hot fuel with the cooling water led to fuel fragmentation, along with rapid steam production and an increase in pressure. The design characteristics of the reactor were such that substantial damage to even 3 or 4 fuel assemblies would, and did, result in the destruction of the reactor. The overpressure caused the 1,000-ton cover plate of the reactor to become partially detached, rupturing the fuel channels and jamming all the control rods, which by that time were only halfway down. Intense steam generation then spread throughout the whole core, fed by water dumped into the core due to the rupture of the emergency cooling circuit, causing a steam explosion and releasing fission products to the atmosphere. About 2 to 3 seconds later, a second explosion threw out fragments from the fuel channels and hot graphite. There is some dispute among experts about the character of this second explosion, but it is likely to have been caused by the production of hydrogen from zirconium steam reactions. So basically, all this pressure from the steam caused where the control rods are to jam up, and so they could not freely move. And probably, the energy, they just stalled. And to me, this makes me think of how it would be in a pressure cooker, with the lids jammed on tight. There's nowhere for the steam or reaction to go, so it explodes. So that's the best way I know how to really compare it and describe it. Again, two workers died as a result of these explosions. The graphite, about a quarter of the 12 tons of it was estimated to have been ejected, and fuel became incandescent and started a number of fires, causing the main release of radioactivity into the environment. A total of about 14 EBQ, 14 by 1018 BQ, of radioactivity was released, over half of it being from biologically inert noble gases. The figure of 5.2 EBQ is also quoted, this being iodine 131 equivalent, minus 1.8 EBQ iodine and 85 PBQ CS 137 multiplied by 40 due to its longevity, and ignoring the 6.5 EBQ xenon 33 and some minor or short-lived nuclides. If there's any nuclear engineers out there who are listening to this who want to email us or whatever to explain what all that means, please do. About 200 to 300 tons of water per hour was injected into the intact half of the reactor using the auxiliary feed water pumps, but this was stopped after half a day owing to the danger of it flowing into and flooding units 1 and 2. From the 2nd to 10th day after the accident, some 5,000 tons of boron, dolomite, sand, clay, and lead were dropped onto the burning core by helicopters in an effort to extinguish the blaze and limit the release of radioactive particles. The 1991 report by the State Committee on the Supervision of Safety in Industry and Nuclear Power on the root cause of the accident looked past the operator actions. It said that while it was certainly true the operators placed their reactor in a dangerously unstable condition, in fact, in a condition which virtually guaranteed an accident, it was also true that in doing so, they had not, in fact, violated a number of vital operating policies and principles, since no such policies and principles had been articulated. Additionally, the operating organization had not been made aware of either of the specific vital safety significance of maintaining a minimum operating reactivity margin or the general reactivity characteristics of the RBMK, which made lower power operation extremely hazardous. So, the State Committee on the Supervision of Safety in Industry and Nuclear Power, that was a Soviet Union thing. So, if you didn't already catch that. So, I know that was certainly a mouthful there. And if you're confused, you're sitting there scratching your head going, what on earth does that even mean? Well, in doing some more research, I've managed to break it down to the best of my ability as to what the World Nuclear Association is saying there. I think the best way that I could put it simply is the RBMK 1000, which was the Soviet-designed nuclear reactor, which is what the Soviet Union at that time, that's primarily what they used, because that type of reactor uses graphite as a moderator and slightly enriched uranium dioxide fuel, because it is cheaper and is more cost effective to do it that way. And, with the system, the communist system over there, and how they ran things, they wanted, they didn't really necessarily want quality, they wanted quantity, right? Because they were in the Cold War, the height of the Cold War against the U.S., and they wanted to win that, and they had to keep appearances up. And so, in order to do that, they had to look like they were the leader in nuclear energy, as opposed to the U.S. And how do you do that? You keep the nuclear energy machine going. And again, how do you do that? You have to have economics have to work in your favor. And if graphite is cheaper to use as a moderator in a nuclear reactor, then it has to be done, according to the Soviet Union. So basically, the RBMK is a boiling light water reactor. And so the water is pumped to the bottom of the fuel channels, it boils, and then it produces steam that drives the turbines. And it's controlled by 211 control rods, and its power output is 3,200 MW thermal or 1,000 MW electrical. And the reactor design includes safety systems like the cooling system. So it has, by all appearances, proper safety systems on the reactor. The problem was that because due to the reactor's positive void coefficient, steam bubbles increase in the reactor. And also at the same time, so does the reactivity of the reactor. It also increases, and that leads to instability, because it's like, I'm cooking under a lot of pressure here. And so the design of the reactor and the fuel, they burned up at the same time of the disaster, which contributed to a positive void coefficient, which played a significant role in the accident. And so really what had happened was, on April 25th, the crew of the reactor in Unit 4 of Chernobyl, they were just running a test. This wasn't even some real life thing. It was just a test. But operator error and disabling of safety mechanisms caused the reactor to become unstable. So basically, as control rods were inserted during this test, a power surge occurred, leading to a steam explosion and the release of radioactive materials. And then the second explosion followed, likely caused by hydrogen production. So basically it was because of a chain reaction. Boom, boom, boom. And efforts to contain the damage included injecting water and dropping materials like boron, sand, and clay onto the burning core. But the accident's root cause, according to the people who investigated this thing, was partly attributed to operator errors, like I said, and the lack of safety guidelines for the RBMK reactor, making low power operation particularly dangerous. So basically, it was operator error and lack of safety guidelines for this reactor, and just system failure on all accounts from the reactor and the humans here involved. And the Soviet Union rushed to cover this up. I mean, they did not want this to get out there. I mean, they went to great lengths, and it really wasn't until people in other European countries began to become ill from acute radiation sickness that the Soviet government at that point was kind of forced to come out and be like, yeah, we screwed up here. And again, like, that's something they did not want to do, but whenever people like your neighbors are calling you out, and they were testing stuff, like they knew that this was coming from the Soviet Union. There was no doubt about that. So at that point, the Soviet Union could not cover it up anymore.
Got a birthday coming up? Looking for the perfect gift for a family member or friend? Nadare Co. Jewelry Company has got you covered. With a large selection of affordable luxury pieces, their products are designed to be waterproof, durable, and effortlessly stylish, so you can wear them any day and anywhere. They make the perfect gift for yourself or for someone you love. They ship internationally, and you can visit the link in our show notes to get 10% off your next purchase.
So on to some very interesting Stranger Things Chernobyl theories, which most of these came after season 3 was released, in between seasons 3 and 4. Some of them actually came out like right before season 3. And look, I understand, because like season 3 was big in the Russians and the big Russians plot and everything, and the height of the Cold War. And so I understand why people would be theorizing, would a big event that occurred in the Soviet Union that completely changed things, not only for the Soviet Union, but just for the world in general. Like, for the first time, the world really saw like what nuclear agents can do. And I think it really, really heightened fear of what could potentially happen if there was a real nuclear war. Well, this is your answer. So I understand why fans of Stranger Things would naturally flock to the idea of them addressing Chernobyl on the show. I mean, I understand it was a very big event in the 80s, but I think throughout the 20th century, probably within the last 100 years, certainly. But a lot of these have been debunked from season 4, and I'll kind of touch on this after I read you the theories about if I think that the show is ever going to bring up Chernobyl in universe. But from Reddit user Gamer Nation, posted this in 19, I went through like the timelines of the seasons, and so they wrote season 1, winter 1983, Christmas; season 2, fall of 1984, Halloween; season 3, summer 1985, Independence Day; season 4 should be spring 1986, Easter, and probably goes into spring break. The post-credit scene was in Russia. Chernobyl happened in spring 1986. How Dr. Owens said that they used something familiar to convince the public to not look any further into the strange happenings. So did a nuclear reactor explode, or did Elle have the greatest battle of her life? Yeah, I mean, they were obviously right about it being in the spring of 1986, although season 4 takes place a month before Chernobyl. But yeah, I mean, I do think that would have been a very interesting thing to see, like if Elle, getting her powers back could have caused Chernobyl. I mean, she's powerful enough for that to happen. I mean, I don't, but yeah, we would know that did not happen. And a lot of this stems from people at that time, or after season 3 came out, and then certainly whenever it was revealed that Hopper was still alive and in Russia, people began to theorize online that 11 was going to go to Russia to rescue Hopper, and that was when things were going to happen there, and she was going to cause Chernobyl to happen, which I did not believe that she was going to go to Russia. I did not think that she was going to be involved in that storyline. It didn't make much sense because, I feel like if they had done that, then they might as well have just had the entire season 4 set in Russia, because 11 is such a big part of the show. I think if you take her out of not just Hawkins but the U.S., if you take her out of the U.S. and you put her in Russia, again, you might as well just have the whole season be set in Russia, because she is the biggest plot point. A lot of it, either is directly or indirectly tied to her, or at least it has been for the last 2 seasons. And I'm like, well, because I knew at that point, after when all the teasers for season 4 started to come out, I knew they had said we're going to be split up this season, and so I knew that they were going to be doing multiple locations, and so I'm like, there's just no way that they're going to have 11 be in Russia the entire time. It's not very feasible. I mean, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It's not very feasible. But, yeah, an interesting take for sure. So, on an article from an article on mentalfloss.com written by Natalie Zamora on June 11th, 2019. So, this was a month before season 3 even premiered. Natalie Zamora was writing this article entitled "What New Fan Theory Predicts Connection Between Stranger Things and Chernobyl?" So Natalie writes, HBO's Chernobyl has been a major post-Game of Thrones triumph for the network, enough to make the miniseries the highest rated TV show on IMDb. While it takes a few creative liberties with a real-life incident, a catastrophic nuclear accident that occurred on April 26, 1986, some fans seem to be watching the miniseries through pop culture colored glasses and wondering if the events of Chernobyl could be impacting the storylines of other series set in the same decade. Case in point, the Redditor, who is already predicting that the infamous disaster will be a key plot point in Stranger Things Season 4. Though the 3rd season of Stranger Things won't even debut until next month, producer Sean Levy has already confirmed that they're planning to make at least 4 seasons of the Netflix hit. Naturally, this has fans thinking ahead. As Decider reports, Redditor Singler wrote that after watching Chernobyl and discovering that the 3rd season of Stranger Things will take place in 1985, they believe the events of Chernobyl could line up well with the Netflix series' presumed 4th season and might be written to the show. Quote, Chernobyl could actually have a secret Russian lab just like the Hawkins one. Someone with powers connects to the Upside Down, just like 11. And the open gate would make the nuclear plant explode. Or maybe they would try to open a gate intentionally to the Upside Down, but it doesn't go as expected. While the idea sounds pretty silly at first, the comments on the post are kind of convincing. Plus, fans have already noticed that on the Stranger Things IMDb page, characters were listed for Season 3 but have since been altered with titles such as Russian Soldier and Russian Guard. Despite the possible connection between the two shows, we still have a whole season to get through to know anything for sure. So yeah, I think this Redditor's theory was mostly about going into season 3, and I was not really as engaged with Stranger Things at the time that this article was written. I didn't even watch the Stranger Things season 3 trailer in real time. The only one I've ever watched in real time so far was the season 4 one. So I don't really remember a lot of this happening. Because again, I wasn't into that back then. But they were right in the sense that the Russians did have a lab. They were up to experiments connected to the Upside Down. Now they did not have, or at least not that we know of, a Russian version of 11. Unless in terms of human. And then they were trying to open a gate over there. That was the case, but no, we did not. Obviously, none of that happen in terms of a Chernobyl instance. But the Russians were a very big part, and they were doing things in a lab, and as we saw in season 4. And we're going to put a pin in that because we're going to come back to that later in this episode. So, speaking of the Chernobyl miniseries, I just want to talk about this for a little bit because I love this miniseries. It is very well done. The cinematography is great. Setting, the directing, the acting, the writing, set design, makeup, all that is just so well done. And it did come out in 19, and like I read earlier, it definitely is not historically accurate. I mean, the producers definitely took a lot of creative liberties with it to tell the story and the dramatization, but they do focus a lot on that graphite. they do that. But again, it is very good. It's on HBO Max. I've seen it 3 times. It's just one of those I like to watch every now and again. It's well done. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And I think maybe the Duffer Brothers maybe did watch it, and maybe they didn't, get so much inspiration to do the Chernobyl thing on Stranger Things, but I do think they took some inspiration from cinematography and the set design and the makeup, because the makeup artist who worked on Chernobyl, the miniseries, was Barry Gower, who did the Vecna makeup and costume for season 4, and I believe season 5 as well. So I think the Duffers did, or someone at Stranger Things did take notice of that part of it to bring him on to Stranger Things, because I do believe that by this time they were getting the idea in mind for Vecna, and they knew what they wanted him to look like and be like. So I do think they did take that inspiration from the miniseries. But anyway, Chernobyl is a 2019 historical drama television miniseries that revolves around the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 and the cleanup efforts that followed. The series was created and written by Craig Mazin and directed by Johan Rink. It features an ensemble cast led by Jared Harris, Stellan Skarsgård, Emily Watson, Jessie Buckley, and Paul Ritter. The series was produced by HBO in the United States and Sky UK in the United Kingdom. The 5-part series premiered simultaneously in the United States on May 6th, 2019, and in the UK on May 7th. It received widespread critical acclaim for its performances, historical accuracy, sphere, tone, screenplay, cinematography, and musical score, which the score is also really good as well. At the 71st Primetime Emmy Awards, it received 19 nominations and won for Outstanding Limited Series, Outstanding Directing, and Outstanding Writing, while Harris, Skarsgård, and Watson received acting nominations. At the 77th Golden Globe Awards, the series won for Best Miniseries or Television Film, and Skarsgård won for Best Supporting Actor in a Series, Miniseries, or Television Film. The release of each episode was accompanied by a podcast in which Mazin and NPR host Peter Sagal discuss instances of artistic license and the reasoning behind them, while critics, experts, and witnesses have noticed historical and factual discrepancies in the series. The creator's attention to detail has been widely praised. I do agree with that, and also I have listened to that podcast. It is fantastic. I highly encourage you to go listen to that. Just type in Chernobyl and it'll come up. But yeah, the podcast is really good as well. But yes, I do agree that the creator, Craig Mazin, his attention to detail, though, of when they get what they get historically right in this miniseries, they get it right. I mean, they nail it. And, I mean, there are, for as much creative liberties that they took, they did make sure to sprinkle in a lot of historical accuracies, and it's just so well done. And so Chernobyl tells the stories of the people who were involved in the disaster and those who responded to it. The series depicts some of the lesser-known stories of the disaster, including the efforts of the firefighters who were the first responders on the scene, volunteers, and teams of miners who dug a critical tunnel under Reactor 4. The miniseries is based in large part on the recollections of Pripyat locals, as told by Belarusian Nobel laureate Svetlana Alexievich in her book Voices from Chernobyl. That's also a really good book. You should definitely check that out. Researchers have documented Alexievich's insertion of her own words into the testimonies of her interview subjects in this and others of her books, as well as her extensive revision, even from one edition to the next, of her interviews, which suggests that her works should not be taken as straightforward history. Yeah, I agree with that. I've read Voices from Chernobyl, and, some of it does seem a little bit too good to be talking about the firefighters there. And that really, for me, in this miniseries, and also probably, I think, one of the most factual that is in Svetlana's book, is the story of the firefighters, because they were first on the scene. I mean, it was really bad. And some of them died like within weeks of the exposure. I mean, it overtook them very, very quickly. And that's one of the more harrowing parts of the show in the book. And there was one of which the storylines is about a real life firefighter who responded to the scene. His name was Vitaly Luchenko. And he was very young. He was only in his 20s. And I mean, within months, his body just basically liquefied. I mean, it's just go look him up and just read about his story. I mean, it's truly, it's so sad. And his wife, who was pregnant with their first and only child, during that time, and the baby passed away in the womb due to her being around him, mostly because she was able to visit him, and just her own exposures from the fallout. So again, it's just one of my personal favorite parts of the miniseries. It's just very sad story all the way around. So yeah, more about the historical accuracy of the show, of the miniseries. The series, like I said before, was praised in the media for being exhaustively researched, but some commentators noted inaccuracies or liberties were taken for dramatic purposes, such as Legasov being present at the trial. He was not. He actually committed suicide before the trial. The first episode depicts Legasov, who Jared Harrod portrays, timing his suicide to the second, 1 hour, 23 minutes, 45 seconds, to coincide with the second anniversary of the Chernobyl explosion. Legasov actually died by suicide a day later. The epilogue acknowledges that the character of Ulana Komyuk, who is played by Emily Watson, is fictional, a composite of Soviet scientist, journalist Adam Higginbotham, who spent a decade researching the disaster and authored the nonfiction account Midnight in Chernobyl, points out in an interview that there was no need for scientists to uncover the truth because many nuclear scientists knew all along that there were problems with this reactor, the problems that led ultimately to an explosion and disaster. Artistic license was also used in the depiction of the Bridge of Death. That's a scene, I think, in like the second episode, second or third episode, from which spectators in Pripyat watched the aftermath of the explosion. The miniseries asserts that the spectators subsequently died, a claim which is now generally assumed to be an urban legend. The series also discusses a potential third steam explosion due to the risk of corium melting through the water reservoirs below the reactor building as being in the range of 2 to 4 megatons. This could have been physically impossible under the circumstances, as exploding reactors do not function as thermonuclear bombs. According to series creator Craig Mazin, the claim was based on one made by Belarusian nuclear physicist Vasily Nestorenko about a potential 3 to 5 megaton third explosion, even though physicists hired for the show were unable to confirm its possibility. The series' production design, such as the choice of pets, props, and costumes, has received high praise for its accuracy. Several sources have commended the attention to even minor setting details, such as the use of actual Kiev region license plate numbers, and a New Yorker review states that the material culture of the Soviet Union is reproduced with an accuracy that has never before been seen from either Western or Russian filmmakers. Oleksiy Bruce, I'm probably not saying that right, a Chernobyl engineer, commends the portrayal of the symptoms of radiation poisoning. Robert Gale Robert Gale, a doctor who treated Chernobyl victims, states that the miniseries overstated the symptoms by suggesting that the patients were radioactive. In a more critical judgment, a review from the Moscow Times highlights some small design errors. For instance, Soviet soldiers are inaccurately shown as holding their weapons in Western style, and Legasov's apartment was too dingy. In Legasov's apartment. In a 1996 interview, Lyudmila Ignatenko said that her baby took the whole radioactive shock. She was like a lightning rod for it. This perception that her husband Vasily was radioactive and caused the death of her daughter soon after birth was recreated in the miniseries. However, Ukrainian medical responder Alla Shapiro, in a 2019 interview with Vanity Fair, said such beliefs were false and that once Ignatenko was showered and out of his contaminated clothing, he would not have been dangerous to others, precluding this possibility. During an interview to BBC News Russian in 2019, Lyudmila described how she suffered harassment and criticism when the series was aired. She claimed reporters hounded her at her home in Moscow and even jammed their foot in her door as they tried to interview her, and that she suffered criticism for exposing her unborn daughter to Vasily, despite the fact that she hadn't known anything about radiation then, and that risk to a fetus from such exposure is infinitesimally small. She said she never gave HBO and Sky Atlantic permission to tell her story, saying there had been a single phone call offering money after filming had been completed. She thought the call was a hoax because it came from a Moscow number and hung up. HBO Sky rejects this, saying that they had exchanges with her before, during, and after filming with the opportunity to participate and provide feedback, and at no time did she express a wish for her story to not be included. The portrayal of Soviet officials, including the plant management and central government figures, received some criticism. Bruce, the Chernobyl engineer, argues that the characters of Viktor Bryukhanov, Nikolai Fomin, and Anatoly Dyatlov were distorted and misrepresented as they were villains. Some reviews criticized the series for creating a stark moral dichotomy in which the scientists are depicted as overly heroic while the government and plant officials are uniformly villainous, which I kind of do agree with. I think it was equal parts, but I digress. The occasional threats of execution from government officials were also seen by some as anachronistic. Russian-American journalist Masha Gessen argues that summary executions or even delayed executions on orders of a single apparatchik were not a feature of Soviet life after the 90s. Hickenbotham takes a more positive view of the portrayal of the authorities, arguing that the unconcerned attitude of the central government was accurately depicted. So why hasn't Chernobyl been mentioned or shown on Stranger Things, and will it ever be? Well, the short answer is no, I don't think it will ever be. I think the big reason being the showrunners likely chose to leave out the Chernobyl disaster because it just didn't fit in with the narrative that they're crafting or trying to craft, which is more centered on government experience, alternate dimensions, and supernatural phenomena. I think the historical events in Stranger Things serve as a backdrop, but the show doesn't attempt to depict real-world historical events in a direct way. Instead, they try to focus on creating a thrilling and eerie atmosphere that combines both realism and fantasy. I think that if they wanted to include Chernobyl, it might have shifted the focus too much into real-world tragedy, and the show could have lost some of its otherworldly charm. I mean, I know that they do include real world tragedy on a smaller scale of grief, things like that, or bullying, or the feelings, the pressures of growing up out of adolescence. Plus, it would have been a bit of a tonal mismatch with the themes of the show. I think too that the Duffers in season 3 were sending or trying to send us the message that 11 is more powerful than even nuclear power and nuclear energy. I mean, they literally showed us that in episode 1 of season 3, when the Russians were trying to open a gate in Russia with essentially a nuclear reactor, which, as we later find out in season 3, is actually being powered by nuclear energy. And guess what? It didn't work. And then when Alexei was explaining it, he believed that the reason it didn't work in Russia was because the veil was weaker over there. than in Hawkins. That Hawkins was the key to the Russians being successful and opening the gate. And while, look, he's not 100% wrong. I mean, Brenner does inadvertently support these claims in season 4. But my theory is that it's not Hawkins, but 11. Yes, the veil between worlds is weaker in Hawkins, but I'm pretty sure that had 11 been in Russia, like when they were trying to open the gate over there, that she could have opened the gate over there as well, like no question. And so I think it all just comes back to like what is Stranger Things, like, what it's about. And I think what the Duffers, especially in season 4, what they've been building towards is in the universe, saying like there's going to be something bigger than Chernobyl, and that is the Upside Down merging with Hawkins, with our reality, and that's much worse than than Chernobyl. I mean, Dmitri, when he tells Yuri in season 4, episode 9, he's like, this evil, like, it affects everyone, including the motherland. And so, I think that's what the Duffers have been building towards. I don't think they've been building all this up to be like, oh, yeah, it's all, was leading up to creating a real world disaster. No, I don't see it as being that. I personally would hate it if they decided to do that, because it would, especially in the final season of the show, that would just completely would undo everything I feel like that they've built and have been building. But I mean, it will be interesting to see, like, in my opinion, I believe they're going to have probably their own version of Chernobyl in a way in season 5. But yeah, it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out.
And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.